All. I think we'll make this start now, delayed as it is. Let me begin by introducing the panelists here. On the right, on my left hand corner, I have with me Usta. She is from Rwanda Governance Board, the CEO of Rwanda Governance Board. Give her a hand. She has been in the governance field for a long period of time, including the subject of today's topic, which is digital ecosystem. Then I have next to him is Zunaid Ahmed Palak. He is the Minister of State for Information and Communication Technology Division of Bangladesh. At the age of 34 in 2014, he was one of the youngest ministers in Bangladesh. He was a young global leader and who also works in green technologies. I have then with me Astha Kapoor. She is the co-founder of Aapti Institute, a research firm examining the interface between technology and society, very apt for today's topic of discussion. She works on data governance, basic income, digitization of welfare, work and social architecture of technology. Then I have with me Kwame Owino. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. He has been instrumental in leading Institute of Economic Affairs, Kenya's strategic intervention into the think tank for sub-Saharan Africa, and the region has been working in this field. We were discussing a lot about today's topic today, and he had his questions, which we'll probably get to hear his views on this subject in the panel today. Then I have to my left, Priyanka Chaturvedi. She's a member of parliament in the Indian upper house, my colleague. She also has been speaking about payment systems, the crypto asset, the privacy bill, data systems. And lastly, I am your moderator. I'm a member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha along with Priyanka. My areas of interest include technology, the interface between technology, society, finance, economics, and of course, how it influences the societal forces and societal pressures. So before I get into the structure of the panel discussion today, we have a curtailed time period of about, I think, 50 minutes, inclusive of some time for question answer. I want to keep about 15 minutes for question answer towards the end. We all know about digital technology, digital ecosystem in all the countries all over the world, particularly after the first wave of the pandemic, when there were countries after countries went into lockdowns in different phases. The need for getting into the digital space to make business run, to make our lives run literally, and to fight the pandemic, to rely on technology. So for the first time, we realize how embedded we have become with technology and how important it is, how important the contribution of technology is to our lives. The achievements of technology in the space of financial inclusion, achievements of technology in societal inclusion, in society itself, are some of the things that I'll start the discussion with. So my question to the panel would be, I'll start with we'll just have the first round, about 4 minutes each. Usta, with you, what do you think, and the same question to all, what do you think are some of the biggest takeaways from technological interventions and innovations in our lives, particularly in light of the pandemic and post-pandemic handling of economy, recovery of economy?
So was that Astha or Usta? Thank you very much. I think I'll start with the experience that Rwanda has gone through. In June 2020, we had been in a lockdown, and after 3 months we came back. In the period of re-engaging the economy, motorcycle drivers had the preparation period of being able to ask for payment that is cashless for the first time. And we had over 20,000 motorcycles able to pay through mobile money. We had the same for taxi drivers. And only in a period of 3 months, from March 2020 to June 2020, we had moved to a cashless economy for more than 450%. Now, we've had a strategy for a cashless economy since 2017, and we had anticipated to be 100% by 2024. The absurdity of the pandemic allowed the National Bank to realize the existing infrastructures and to fast-track that 7-year initial plan. So I would say that the biggest achievements have always stood at the background of having existing infrastructures, or at least investing in ICT infrastructure. The opportunity of having an ICT infrastructure system that could be user-friendly, that could allow access when human access was very limited, that could transfer our engagements from the cash traditional approaches to using mobile money and other e-payment systems, was fast-tracked during that period. But what enabled it, I think I will also add, the flexibility of government in terms of policy. The National Bank was, in that period, was able to mandate and take responsibility on costs of transfers. So they removed a limit of financial transfer from your bank to your mobile money. We used to have a very specific limit that was low. It got open for engagement. They introduced payment codes and allowed a given period of non-fee for that. And therefore, there was an encouragement that allowed all of us to nearly migrate to a cashless economy. So I would say that the ICT sector, for us, benefited the most, but because it wasn't a time for investment just, it was also a time to enjoy the investment. Of course, we know it wasn't fully for everyone, but some of the children were able to continue with education uninterrupted because we had existing ICT infrastructure. So I think the pandemic allowed us to do business the unusual way, and because we had a given level of existing infrastructure, we were able to fast-track initial long-term projects into fast service delivery systems. So for me, it was also service delivery, looking at ICT as a vehicle for service delivery. I just gave that one example, but we had similar things in the agriculture sector. We had similar things in the health sector, especially knowing who gets access to the vaccines, being able to track the patients, those that were COVID positive, and being able to isolate them using our online systems, and also being able to reach out to people for medicine through the use of ICT and technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Usta. Zunaid?
Thank you for having me.
What was the situation in Bangladesh? And I think you could talk a little bit about the BRAC, which probably played a significant role in providing that last mile connectivity in taking technology to the common man.
Thank you very much for having me here. And first of all, I would like to share the Vision 2021 Digital Bangladesh declared by Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina back in 2008. That was the breakthrough in our digital economic ecosystem, because after declaration of Digital Bangladesh Vision, we have built up 4 pillars like connectivity to all, from 5 million internet users to now 130 million internet users. So each and every villages of our country are now under the mobile network and are under the 4G network. And we have connected all of our union digital centers, which is the lowest tier of our local government, has been connected with fiber optical broadband connectivity. So that was the main base and the infrastructure of digital economy. And the secondly, we have developed our human resources. We have been able to aware our citizens, because from like who are working for the ready-made garments and who are working abroad, they are using mobile financial wallet. You were mentioning about Bikash. So a very innovative solution started back in 2010 because of Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. She took the initiative to set up National Payment Gateway Switch. So that was the breakthrough in our digital economical revolution. And now we have 114 million mobile financial wallet users. And during this pandemic, we have been able to adapt with this new normal, and all of our transactions and stipends and all the social safety net disbursement was possible to use central aid management software developed by ICT Ministry. And the third one was digital service delivery online. So near about 2,000 services are already digitized and available online. And fourth, digital industry development. So all these three pillars we have developed properly in last 1 decade, and that is why when we faced this pandemic and initial stage back in 2020 in March, we developed 5 continuity plans, like one for education, another for health, connectivity, logistics, and entertainment. And we followed the continuity plan and in collaboration and partnership with different ministries. So now our target to make Bangladesh a cashless, inclusive, and a digital economic country, and that is why we're going to introduce interoperable digital transaction platform, which is Binimoy, so that all this MFS, digital payment, and banks and merchant accounts should be interoperable. And now we are in conversation with India and some other countries, so that how we can make these interoperable national platforms cross-border platform. So I think this is the right time to introduce our central bank digital currency and to have bilateral and multilateral connectivity among the countries. So I think a country like Bangladesh, India, Kenya, or Rwanda, we should try to get our innovative digital transaction platforms. So in last, I would like to share that we need 4 components to have digital economic ecosystem. Number 1 is digital identity, which we all have in our countries. And second is digital payment system. Fourth is verification and authentication platform. And definitely fourth is national digital architecture. So if we could have this ecosystem, and if we could have this all regulations and protocol and architecture, definitely we can make cashless and we can make inclusive digital economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Zunaid. Astha, I would just like to make a little departure in the sense the financial inclusion that they talked about in their respective countries is something that most of us know about. But don't you think that technology is also a great leveler in terms of societal, ensuring societal inclusion? Because I think what we saw during the pandemic and what we are seeing even now is more and more people from rural areas who normally had no access to technology are getting into the UPI platforms, are getting into payment through their mobiles. They may not be knowing about the architecture, but they were forced to get into that, and now they love it. Would you like to talk about that?
So yeah, so I think, like you said, like India's starting point in March 2020 was maybe a little bit different from Rwanda and Bangladesh, because we were already very much in the throes of our digitization and digital movement, which started maybe 10 years ago when we started to unroll Aadhaar. But I might want to disagree with you a little bit on that, because I think that while India has been extremely digitalized over the last 10 years, there is also significant exclusion that happens, not just on the last mile, but because there are, I mean, a population of our size, there will be breakdowns, and that is only logical. But what happened during the pandemic is that the state became more and more digital, so your usual mechanisms of grievance, of being able to hold the state accountable, were also no longer available. So I think that the exclusion was much, much more significant and severe at a time where people needed to rely on the state much more. I'll give you an example, maybe different from payments, and we all went through this, is that the way to get vaccines in India was through the CoWIN platform. That was an extremely complex exercise for all of us, right? You needed certain kinds of ID, you needed a smartphone, and you needed to be able to navigate this app. There were people who were trying to hack into it and sort of jump the line, if I may, to get vaccines. And what ended up happening is that till there was an intervention to say, okay, you can go to a government service provider and get your vaccine, when it was not digitally mediated, that's when access became more democratized. Similarly, I mean, when you talk about welfare systems, right, in India, the PDS is right now intermediated by Aadhaar, and you have to go authenticate yourself, because that was a solution that made sense because there was a lot of leakage. But when the pandemic happened and people were moving back home and all of that, and they were not on the list, they were not on the right, they weren't, ration was not being made available, a lot of states did away with that digital intermediation. They went analog because it was important to give people support, and not necessarily push digital. So I think that, at least in my view, what we learned was through the pandemic that digital breaks down, that cashless doesn't always work, and that at the time of crises like the COVID-19 pandemic, exclusion becomes extremely magnified if all your engagement is through digital. And then, of course, layered on top of that are questions about data security and privacy, where we were all working from home and doing all our transactions digitally. All of those became, I think, made India an extremely complex landscape for that. So yes, I'm sure, and I know that UPI payments grew. But also what's interesting is that if you look at, say, investments that have come on into fintech in India, 80% of the investments have gone to serve 20% of the population. So things are not trickling down, and I hate that phrase, but it is applicable here.
Absolutely right, Astha. I would have come to that question in the second round. There are some pre-existing inequities. So the digital intervention, which was accentuated during the pandemic, made it all the more starker. But it doesn't take away the fact that we have to move in that direction of the jam trinity, getting more people into the inclusive network of the digital ecosystem to bridge this inequity. It may be through providing each one of them a smartphone, through small, these women self-help groups, as many states have done. It could be by giving tablets to school children. But then for the first time, the governments everywhere, I think, realize that digital is the way to go forward in order to bridge this inequity, which is already pre-existing. Because if you want to give health services, if you want the transfer to the farmers' accounts to take place, they need to have an account. So I agree that the digital divide, which is already there, which is already pre-existing, that is the first thing that has to be bridged. Yeah. There is no doubt about it. But the gains of expanding the digital network probably is the way forward, because that's the way in which we can make benefits reach people faster. Would you like to agree to this? What's the situation in Kenya?
Okay, I think to answer your question requires that I take a different orientation, which is that there's nothing inherently good or bad in technology of any kind. I think what matters, and perhaps what we should focus on, and my background is policy, so perhaps that's why. So the most important thing is, as she's demonstrated, if, say, Indians or Kenyan citizens need a certain service, then the mechanism for providing that service should be neutral, and the most important thing is, how do we get that service to them? So anything that insists that unless you're on a certain platform, which is the result of a subjective idea, becomes dangerous. And it could push democratic societies towards, look, this is what we've determined and all that. So let me give you an example. When COVID struck And of course, Kenya went into a lockdown in March of 2020, sorry. In 2019, the government of Kenya had undergone demonetization. And the Indian history in demonetization and Kenya's are very interesting as well. But the point was, regardless of what we want to see, the handling of cash is still more equitable or more widely distributed than digital mechanisms for transferring money. So if a government was to make a decision, and what government decided was in terms of social protection, the best way to do it was actually to send money to people through the mobile money transfer, which in Kenya is called an M-Pesa service, fairly efficient. But the truth is, some of the poorest and most vulnerable people do not have that access. And it's not their fault. So the major thing we have to ask ourselves as we are talking about pushing digital one way or the other, I think we need to be cautious. There are efficiencies to be made, certain huge efficiencies, the speed and the efficiencies are real. But if someone doesn't have, what is the factor? Our judgment at the Institute of Economic Affairs that whether financial inclusion exists or not is actually not determined by the technology. We should be technology neutral. It is a function of income and employment. So if people don't have employment and therefore not able to access one gadget or the other, or to go to a place where they're able to find internet access, then it's upon government to actually consider digital and other mechanisms, be they be analog, as complementary forms. The push towards exclusion of everything else to in the interest of digital is dangerous, again, for a second reason, that in Kenya, the mobile money transfer is one of the successes. The amount of money that's distributed every year, or rather, that is transferred every year using mobile money transfer mechanism, what we call M-Pesa, is equivalent to something like close to 100% of GDP in terms of the transfers per year. So everybody considers that a success, and it is, except most of it goes through a single system. So basically what that means is that the infrastructure of Kenya's largest telecommunications company is also a huge part of Kenya's national payment system. So should it fail, and it has, over some weekends, then we have those troubles. So unlike you, I'd like us to be a little bit more circumspect. Governments, because it serves people, and as representatives of people, should say, what's the most efficient way to serve people in a technology-neutral way? And digital is not always the best. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, Priyanka, I would pose this question to you a little differently. What Astha said and what Owino said about whether it's important for governments to ensure that this digital divide is first bridged, and only then go for expansion of digital infrastructure. Or you first go ahead and have the digital infrastructure and then push the digital system down, you know, in a graded manner or in a campaign mode in some kind of a way. Why this is important is, if you look at the pandemic, during the lockdown, there was no way a banking mitra like in India, a banking friend, as they say, could go down to every household to serve the people. There was no physical contact. In which case, the only way was to serve them through digitally. And if there was no digital connect, then to establish the digital connect and then provide the service, not to forget about them completely and wait for the households to get digitally connected. What do you think about this? It's like the chicken and egg story. Which one comes first?
Exactly the same thing. It's like the question is, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Exactly.
I will always go in favor and speak in favor of creating infrastructure and then managing to bring in more people and including them in those infrastructure systems. And as far as I would say the India story is concerned, of course, there are many downsides to going digital, but I would only see the upsides of it all. Especially during COVID, COVID proved that transitions can happen. Transitions, unfortunately, were forced at that point in time, but India could live up to that challenge, whether it was through, you know, your life was surrounded and reduced to your mobile phones or to technology. I come from the state of Maharashtra. Maharashtra happens to be one of the most business-minded states in the country. It is also home to the financial capital of the country, which is Mumbai. we were seeing how transitions have happened and how quickly people adapt to changes. So we have to trust inherently upon making positive changes. It could not include 100% of the population immediately, but it could transform from a 25 to a 50 to a 100. So yes, we all saw tragic scenes of, exclusion at that point in time. But I would always look at the glass half full rather than half empty, and going digital is the only way forward, whether we look at our banking systems, whether we look at the DBT transfers, whether we look at a national identity, and we have to find convergences in a manner where there is zero leakage. The biggest challenge that India faced was of transparency not being there, accountability not being there, and of course in terms of corruption. So if we can eradicate that through technological interventions, it becomes imperative that any nation that the size of India that it is, we have to move towards digital inclusion. And I must say, the kind of, if we look at the UPI payments which are increasing almost triple as compared to what it began with, if we look at how banking accounts have opened up, how women also are now included in the financial system, I think it is a good story to begin with, and only to have inherent faith, also being cautious about creating frameworks before jumping headlong into decision processes. So when he spoke about demonetization came as a huge shocker. We did not have the infrastructure in place. And that is why India perhaps suffered a lot more because of its unpreparedness. So if we have an infrastructure in place, and we have the, we have the intent of creating that positive change, then there's a lot that can be done. And COVID probably showed us that. It showed us the best of technology, showed us the worst of technology also, which includes the exclusions when we talk about access to mobile phones, when we talk about access to internet, girls dropping out of the education systems because they did not have access to digital technology. So those are questions which definitely we need to look for answers and address, but I would not dismiss technology or going digital, because that's the only way forward.
So you made a point that if you unleash the potential of technology in terms of reducing time for transfer, maybe of resources from government, some kind of subsidies, if you decrease the transaction cost, if you make things faster, then the same people who would probably not be inclined towards getting included in the digital ecosystem would probably get included. 1 minute response on this, that if you push technology, if people realize the potential benefits from using technology, even if they were initially not very, or not very inclined towards it, and also they did not have the infrastructure, because we hear so many times in our households that the children use it, but the parents don't use it because they think that technology is something which is beyond them. But the moment they realize that it is making life easier for them, then they would also start adopting it, and that is what has also happened in India. What's your response in 1 minute before we go to the next theme of our discussion today?
Well, thank you very much. I think I should say that government has to have three things clearly. First, they have to have an articulated vision that is not just a pick-up thing. They should model the way. So, for example, in Rwanda, already public servants were being paid through the IT systems way before COVID-19. So you already see government implementing that. To bring the private sector alongside, you have to create certain incentives, make it easy. If they can only declare their taxes online, it becomes easier than them spending a day at the revenue authorities. And thirdly, of course, there are certain advantages that ordinary citizens see. While the system might be hard, I think it's very important that you make it easy, user-friendly. So I'll give example. You have, like in the situation of Rwanda, we have agents that initially were teaching people on how to do it themselves. So I think realistically, even the financial systems as we have them today have had their flaws. People do not have a financial record. But when they go through the mobile money systems, they start to build their financial records. People would not access banks like we are saying. So for me, the real question is, if we compare the access systems, how much comfortable were we also in the previous, in the system we are going out from? So I really guess that the adjustment has its own challenges, but I think, as said, that's the only way to go, because it makes service delivery easier. If you are dealing with countries where corruption is at a high rate, it allows a little bit of more accountability and more transparency. And therefore, there are so many positives that you can look at into the systems without neglecting the challenges that stand out.
Thank you, Usta. But since we are running out of time, I think I'll just pick up from one particular point which you mentioned, the challenges. The challenges in adopting digital systems, whether in payment systems, whether in banking systems, whether in our delivery of social service benefits, in any kind of system. What are the challenges? Astha spoke about privacy issues, privacy concerns, spoke about concerns relating to frauds, hacking, all kinds of stuff. So would you like to say that while we go full hog on digital implementation of digital technology in all our systems and procedures, not only in government but in the private sector as well, one has to be aware of the negatives, the challenges. So I think, why don't you talk about that?
Okay, so let me speak about Bastian. No, first, I hope I have not created the impression that there's some digital resistance. Certainly not. I mean, I'm probably here because of a lot of digital technologies, one after the other. But what a relentless push towards all digital does is it creates the kind of problem I'm going to tell you about. Now, in 2019, in November 19th of 2019, the government of Kenya completed a 4 months phase out of old currency and new currency came in. When this new currency came in, among the feedback that the government had received to parliamentarians was that visually impaired people, who constitute about 3% of Kenya's adult population, could not conduct transactions because of that. So the new notes that were created were actually distinguishable by touch for a person who's learned some braille and all that. If you push digital against that background, it means all the advantages that you've built in this system suddenly collapse, because unless they have a very sophisticated phone and machine learning capability that can read a transaction slip to them, they are completely back to where they were actually worse, because now they cannot transact. So that's all I say. All I'm trying to say is we must be cautious about suggesting that digital is all good, analog is all bad. Just that. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to jump the gun. And I also didn't mean to say that, India was all bad during COVID, because I think that, the infrastructure that we built on identity, on payments is really, seen us through the good days and the bad days. And I think UPI is truly a magical technology. But at the same time, I agree with what Kwame said, is I think that it's the burden of the state to make sure that everyone on the last mile is included. And I think that what ends up happening is, of course, access, whether it's to the instrument, to the software, which is the internet, the ability to use, all of those end up compounding. So if you're an old woman trying to digitally access your pension in the middle of, Rajasthan or wherever, you were used to just going to the post office, but now suddenly that post office doesn't exist and things are coming to your phone, and nobody has helped you negotiate that. And that's why I believe that one of the things, the biggest challenge is, how do we create that offline mechanism that helps people get online and helps people negotiate and access technology much better. So the agents that Usta mentioned, I think those are critical, and I think that in COVID we lost those offline agents, and that's why things went as awry as they did.
What I was trying to get at is the challenges that one faces after having implemented a digital system.
Right.
Now, where we are, for example, India would probably by 2030, my figures say that they would have grown some 10 times. In 2020, India had a digital economy of 85 billion US dollars, and it is expected to become $800 billion economy by 2030. That's almost 10 times. Now, when you are expanding at this rate, what are the challenges that that happens to citizens, privacy, data protection, then and when this is growing, it is just not growing domestically, it is also growing, crossing boundaries. So what are the geographies, countries? So what are the things that actually could be faced by citizens, by governments, by private people, all the actors that are involved in digital economy? That's what I thought you would talk about. Can you just speak a few minutes on that?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, when you grow, of course, as quickly as India has grown over the last 10 years, there's a huge concern, obviously, about privacy. We in India are one of the largest countries without a data protection framework, which you, of course, know better than most people in the room. That, of course, leaves us very, very vulnerable. As technology and data practices grow, we are unprotected. We have no mechanism of accountability, of grievance, of redressal of any sort. That leaves us extremely vulnerable. The second is, of course, like the question around how this data is being used. Are we able to, there are big questions, and COVID has also expanded that our data is valuable through as a social good. So much of COVID research happened because data was able to move across borders very quickly. But of course, we are thinking about localization and what does that mean when it comes to innovation on social good. And so there are lots of tensions around ideas of sovereignty, ideas of privacy, ideas of innovation that need to be resolved as we grow much, much more on the digital front. And I think that India is at that interesting crossroad.
Thank you. Priyanka, I think just taking on from there, you realize that this technological revolution has resulted in the emergence of what we call as the big tech. Now, these big tech platforms, have they become the new monarchs? Because, taking on from what Astha said, the issues relating to sovereignty, the issues relating to who decides what is the truth. Now, what is your take on this?
Absolutely. I think we are seeing a situation where communication and tech is being totally controlled by a few people. And few people who are concentrated in a particular geography. And that is definitely a problem. So India has very valid concerns. Everyone's looking at India because of its markets, but is not willing to address the challenges that Indians are facing because of the access that we have given to them. So today, an Elon Musk can overnight buy Twitter, and India doesn't know how Twitter's rules and regulations and guidelines will be framed because of an individual holding it. The same goes for Facebook as well. So till where do we realize that there has to be accountability or a safe harbor given to such big techs? And India will need to. And I think it is high time we did. That expect some kind of accountability on the basis of the different society that we are, different languages we speak, different ways of communication within our geographical boundaries should be. I think these big techs should be sensitive to the fact and should not just look at India as a market. I have spoken about it multiple times, but seek accountability. So today, I'll just give an example and leave it with that. India faced, a lot of Indian women, particularly from a minority community, were targeted through these, apps and these digital platforms. And every time the police sought data or information, they faced, an entire mechanism which pushed them back from getting that data and said it is out of privacy concerns that they cannot share data on such, cases, in such criminal cases. What does India do then? Should the women suffer? So those are things where I feel accountability is needed, and the big tech being in the hands of a few and concentrate in a particular geography should be more sensitive and more accountable.
Very well said. Thank you so much for getting me into the question of regulation. This brings us to decide whether we need to regulate this big tech, whether we need to regulate the way we are expanding. What is the kind of regulation? Is it a soft touch regulation or it's very hard regulation? And when new emerging digital assets are coming up, like crypto assets, like NFTs, the non-fungible assets, so what is the kind of regulation that we should have? Let me get the first response from Zunaid.
No, I think the traditional banking and financial institutions are in great threat because 2 decades back, if you can remember, Bill Gates said that banking is necessary, but banks are not. And we are actually experiencing that truth each and every countries in the world. In Bangladesh, we have 14,000 agent banking centers, even at the village level. So traditional banks, branches are now disappearing. So we cannot ignore new technologies because if you want to do something new, you have to stop doing old things. But correctly and rightly you have mentioned about regulations, strong rules or laws, and international governance because we need international financial transaction governance or platform or council, something like that, because SWIFT or platform like this cannot actually be imposed to each and every countries in the world. They now have to follow their rules and their guidance. But you see every day our startups, our tech startups, fintech startups, they're coming with new innovative solutions. Who is taking care of all this? So I think we have to innovate something, new technologies, innovative solutions to combat with this problem and challenges. Because in Bangladesh, we have recently introduced nano loans for poor people who are living below poverty line. So now they're getting 5,000 taka or 10,000 taka loans from this mobile financial wallets because it is actually reducing the gap between the rich and poor, between the urban and rural areas, because we are using digital technology as a tool to reduce the digital divide and the so we want to make it inclusive. So my view is we have to innovate something new and innovative solutions, and we have to embrace the opportunities of technology. At the same time, national and single national policy or rules or regulations or law is not enough. We need to have regional and global platform to introduce new regulations for the whole world. Thank you.
I'll ask you a very tough question on that now. That you gave the beautiful example of innovation of bridging this gap between the rich and the poor. But do you think that that has happened, this innovation has happened because the regulation was light? If the
Yes,
regulation would have been tougher and stricter, maybe that innovation would not have come up. The public policy practitioners all over the world are now facing this question. What is the right balance between regulation and innovation? So, you know, what is your response?
Sometimes you need deregulation, and sometimes you need to make your regulators as the facilitators, what we are practicing in Bangladesh. And we are trying to introduce sandboxes for different regulators and agencies, because when you don't have laws or regulations or rules, you have to create some sandbox. So in Bangladesh, what we believe in the in strategies like first guidelines, then policy, then law. We don't want to go straight to the law. We don't want to impose all the regulations and rules to the innovators or entrepreneurs. So this is how we are balancing between new technologies, innovation, and threats. And definitely we have some new technologies like blockchain and other NFT you have mentioned, what we can apply to protect our privacy data, and we should embrace these new technologies. Thank you.
I'll come to you with this question. Should the big tech be under regulation? And if we decide to do so, can we do it? Do we have the regulatory capacity? Not you, any one of us. Any of you can answer this question. First, she talked about, Priyanka, she talked about big tech to be under regulation, some kind of regulation. But if we do we have the regulatory capacity? Does any country have the regulatory capacity?
Well, I think I want to take that, and I think I don't know who else is the lawyer on this team, but I'm one. And I would say that I would take it from what you said, regulation for innovation. You know, I think it goes wrong when we look at regulation only as disabling. We should also be innovative in how we regulate. We should regulate for the current situations and the future that we want. And in that, I guess there are two major elements. First, deregulate, like he said. A lot of the traditional regulation we have considered the context we are in. The context we are in today and the context we are moving to requires also policymakers and regulators to adopt to the new realities. And I guess if we do that and look at regulation that enables innovation, that also enables ease of doing business, I'll use the term, that is going to be easier. The privacy of the people that we protect. The reason we are moving into all of these systems is to give more value to people and give them more credibility and give them more dignity. So anything we do, whether it's law, whether it's platforms, should really be making a lot of meaning to the people that we are serving in the real sense, in terms of making service delivery easier, and therefore having regulations that make it easier for them, and making enabling regulations. And that regulation should also be as protective as it can. Thank you.
Priyanka, actually, my question was this. It's good to have regulation. We talk about regulation. But do you have the capacity to enforce the regulation? That's very important. And particularly so in case of the new age digital assets like crypto, which knows no boundaries. Data flows across geographical boundaries. Or you have the social media platforms whose headquarters are not even known to you, who don't have representatives to serve them a notice.
So, as far as crypto is concerned and blockchain is concerned, technology will always be ahead of the curve, and policies will only be trying to catch up. Either you create policies that are facilitators, or you create policies on the basis of not understanding how technology will work. Are we willing to take that risk, or are we going to be risk averse? So that's a decision for every state government or governments to take. Now, I have always been, when I say regulation, I do not seek some kind of control. All I seek is, if you're looking at India as a market, it always comes with some terms and conditions. And apply those terms and conditions. Big tech, I'm not at any point in time discouraging big tech, but I'm also concerned about too much power in the hands of a few. And we give them the terms and conditions to operate in our society, in our workspace, in our country. That is all I meant when I say broader guideline and being able to implement that. And I think it's very easily implementable. Australia is doing that. Singapore is doing that. I think European Union is discussing this now. So it's time that India also looked, it is one of the biggest market they have. We can discuss that. And as far as crypto is concerned, I think we are all out here, I can say that with total confidence. None of us understand it in totality. We do not understand all the risks involved, but we also definitely do not understand the advantages of biting the bullet. So my point is that there should be a point where the government says, we are willing to be facilitators, but with caution. And that can only come with some kind of education and conversation around this particular space. So Web 3.0 is a reality. We are all living in that. Youth is invested in it. There are crores and crores invested in it. So we cannot just overnight take a decision. So like he said, we create guidelines, then comes the law.
Then I'll again, thank you so much for your response, but I'll again fox you another question. The question is, we talk about all these things, but you talk about having those terms and conditions, but then one of us again stands up and says, oh, my freedom of expression is violated.
So I'll give you another example.
I think I would want all of you to respond to this and then end the thing with, I think all this would finally require some kind of, as some of you said, international collaboration. We need to have an international order. Countries across the world, running across geographical boundaries, will have to decide what is the kind of regime in digital expansion or digital economy that we need to have, whether it is a crypto, whether it is NFT, whether it is privacy of individuals, whether it is government policies. And that's what actually has come across now from most of the top global leaders. But that's for the end. I think I'll first ask all of you to respond to this, that when we put in regulations, democracies, people say it's a freedom, it's a violation of the freedom of expression. It's something that you are infringing upon.
I'm itching to answer that. Please allow me to go first. Democracy and freedom of speech. Of course, we all must respect it. It's a nation of 1.3 billion people. And we all must understand that not everybody is going to be happy at every given point in time. But there has to be a larger consensus arrived at. And a consensus can be achieved when in a democracy, freedom of speech, your version of freedom of speech and my version of freedom of speech is heard. And then a policy is decided. That is my basic intrinsic point here. Now, for example, when we talk about free speech, right, I just mentioned Elon Musk, and everybody is celebrating, someone's unhappy, someone's whatever their reasons. So he says, I'm a free speech absolutist. But he is also the one who's blocking people right now who's criticizing him. So, freedom of speech is a very individual thought about how you look at it, but we are talking about the larger good. And that is all.
Would anybody like to respond? Yeah, please. Oh, each one of you. Very good. Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
All right. So let's come with the. I think most of the concerns that everybody has about well, they tend to be what we call social media and digital tools are related to. I think we should start by asking, what's the risk that's being regulated? Now, the risk is, I too am a maximalist in freedom of speech. But let me say, the risk would be this. I don't think that a global compact on how to manage these organizations is necessary. My view is that the sovereignty of, say, the people of Kenya or the people of India would decide that, look, these are the rights we grant to our citizens. When a citizen decides to subscribe to a specific tool, then basically what governs that is a contract between the citizen and whoever it is. So their privacy will be according to what Indian law is, and we therefore say that this is our interpretation of it. That a citizen would use a tool such as Twitter to say unpalatable things, in my view, is something that if it is consistent with what Indian law accepts, then so be it. And whoever it is that is providing that facility for them should be aware that we will interpret this part of what has happened with respect to Kenyan law or whatever jurisdiction. So a global compact, in my view, is extremely paternalistic, I think dangerous. Why? Because these tools will not subsist. I think they are the flavors of the month, and they will be replaced by others. When I started work, sometime in 2003 and 4, there was a big antitrust case against the corporation also known as Microsoft, right? It was supposed to have completely enslaved all of us into systems and all those other things. It didn't happen, right? 5 years later, we had Google, and now we have something else, and something else is going to arise. So part of it is governments must always approach these dangers by saying, look, we will not panic. What I see right now is panic, and we're trying to hold somebody responsible regardless of what I say today, even if it's completely silly. And patronizing citizens by saying that citizens are unable to tell what's truth. I mean, telling citizens that there is one version of truth and it must be consistent with what we say. So what? People tell lies off social media and everywhere. So the idea that a social media space, for instance, I give that one example, must be clean of misconception or any other thing is, I think, going too far, and we probably will miss it. So what would happen? I would be concerned if a tool is used to commit a crime, such as what she said. If somebody uses a tool to commit a crime, regardless of where the crime is committed, then we should say that the evidence that is required and the cooperation that is required will be granted to this government when it demands it. That, in my view, is acceptable. Everything else about who's dancing and dancing on a flag or doing what kind of things, I think is too petty. And all governments, I hope the government of India would agree, have so much work done to be looking at who's dancing on Twitter on the national flag. Thank you.
Astha, would you like?
I forget what we're answering now, but I think I think of the idea of the idea of freedom of speech, I think that I think
I was
with
talking about regulation and
Yes.
freedom of speech.
I think what we have to think about is the question of harm. Who is being harmed for what, and what are the thresholds of harm? And which is why, as Kwame was talking, I was also reconsidering the idea of the global compact, because it's so cultural. The idea of harm is so personal and localized, and so we may share a set of values and a potential framework, but sort of reworking that and actually having domestic regulation on, and I would start from harm and the impact, as opposed to regulating the technology itself. You regulate the use and then you impact, and think through the impact. And I think that's where, whether it's freedom of speech or whether it's crypto, I think all of those will come into, and it's a very vast canvas, I understand. But I think if we focus on the potential harms and then start thinking about what are the mechanisms for grievance, how do we hold these companies, social media or cryptocurrency guys accountable? I think that's the role of the regulator.
Thank you so much. Zunaid, would you like to add something more here?
I think freedom of speech does not mean that you can hurt someone by your speech. So that is my understanding and that is my belief, and that is why I'm in favor of applying local rules and regulations to all this global platform, because religious culture and our regional culture is very important to us, because maybe one kind of speech or status is acceptable in US but not in India or in Bangladesh. So I'm in favor of customizing rules and regulations according to land of law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think contextualizing is key, but the tricky part is cybercrimes. And some of cybercrimes, and some of these cybercrimes are the traditional crimes we've been committing on land. And that has been always easy because it's very easy in terms of jurisdiction. But because we go beyond the land jurisdiction in some of these crimes, some people are enjoying, a lot of hate speech is spreading too much, in Rwanda, genocide denial is becoming the fashion on Twitter and on all of those things. So the danger, it also possesses sometimes on the existence of certain people is real. And therefore, I think one of the discussions has to go on beyond this room. We have seen international crimes being regulated with all its weaknesses. Now, there's no perfect system. Some of the things that are happening here online have to also have a context and have to have a sense of jurisdiction. And I know international jurisdiction is the biggest challenge in many ways, but we cannot fail to understand that behind a computer, criminals exist as well. And the enjoyment they have beyond the computer is the space of being far from any police, any real police in the real sense. So that's also a very fragile space to engage, and I think just the discussion.
Thank you so
has to
much.
go
Thank you so much. I think we have gone far beyond the time, and we'll have to have questions from the audience. But I'll just end the discussion with two questions here, or not two statements here. One, we know that India is the largest democracy in the world. We also know, I think those who are not here from India, we have a provision in our constitution. The right to freedom is guaranteed by the constitution as a fundamental right, as many countries. But there is a provision over there, something called reasonable restrictions. And those reasonable restrictions are specified in the constitution itself. So no right is absolute. It is a part of the constitution itself. The second point is, if an American firm wants to do some kind of offshore accounting in Mumbai and transfer data to India in Mumbai, and we had a regime where the privacy of the data or the protection of the data cannot be guaranteed, will the American firm do business? I'll end with this. I hope the questions that come forward from the audience here will address some of these and some more. Can I have it from here first? Yeah. Deepak, can you get the mic over there? You could specify the name of the panelist that you would want to answer ask the question to, or you can just pose it in general. Someone can just take it up.
Okay, thank you. This is Deepak Maheshwari. I'm CEO of Public Affairs Forum of India and also Senior Fellow with Senior Center for Digital Future. And sometimes, yes, it takes me back more than 24 years when I had filed a petition against the internet policy within 24 hours when it was announced in 15 January 1998 in India. Anyway, I think when we are talking about these things around digital, one other thing that we should focus on is, apart from the laws and infrastructure and other things, is the capacity building, not just of the state or the regulatory system, but also of the citizens. For example, no matter how good traffic lights we have or how good traffic police are, if people don't know how to drive well, there's no amount of traffic police be able to manage the chaos that we'll have and the type of harm that will emerge from this. So I think apart from having the investment towards the hard infrastructure, towards the institutional build-up, all this is necessary, but what is it that is also being done in creating the digital skills, the digital literacy among the people, and especially this is relevant in the developing countries, much more so from two other angles. One, we still have a lot of population that has functional illiteracy even today. And secondly, a lot of this type of information or even the contracts or anything else is available in English or some other language. So even if those people have functional literacy, that's again a linguistic challenge. So I think that's another area that we should think about. And
thank you so much. I think this is what the entire panel would agree to. There's nothing to reply to. When we talked about regulatory capacity in some, not in so great detail, actually that's what we are referring to. Can I have the question from there, please?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, I think you have the mic first. Okay, you decide yourselves, between both of you.
Okay. Follow-up to question from Deepak. My name is Kanish Gaur. I'm a founder of a public policy think tank called as India Future Foundation, and I work with majority of the big tech. Something that I've seen is that many of these big tech are not serious about following the laws of the land, be it India or other places. They also realize that they are needed in the country. Politicians need them, bureaucrats need them, so we can't get away with them. They have created very strong teams of lawyers, policy experts who understand the law of the land, not of one country, but multiple countries. Very small teams. Let's just look at Twitter. They had like less than 100 people, but close to 5 crore people on Twitter in this country. We have created these giants. Now, if you want to have them stringed or you want to cut them, do you think coming out with a data protection law or a policy, we need to wait for 2 years, 3 years? Can there be an update on a timely basis? Because technology changes really quickly. We were talking about artificial intelligence. Now here we are moving to quantum computing, and the dimensions keep on changing. So the question is to the panelists, do you think there has to be more investment in terms of creating more tech-enabled policies and getting our leaders to learn first about tech before they actually go and talk about laws? Thank you.
So would like to, I think he's specific to India, so it's either. Let's have the other question.
But madam, I have a slew of questions. First of all, I'd like to, just a few seconds on him. He used a a metaphor, where the traffic signal, he mentioned about, but digital is not, it's not comparable anyway with the traffic. It's unknown. In traffic, you have a destiny, but digital, no one knows it. Every day we're into, some sort of, we're discovering.
But what he was referring to was digital literacy.
No, not literacy. Not literacy. It's about discovering.
So you come with the question. Huh?
Yeah. So I have a question for Palak Bhai. Any of you can guess what is the data price in India? Can any of you? Yeah, so why can't we have the same? It's about $8 in US, but it's about less than $0.09 in India. So I'm talking about the data price in India. So why we can't democratize then, especially in South Asia? This is a question for Palak bhai, you.
Thank you for asking this very interesting question. So in Bangladesh, we have introduced one country, one rate for the data, and we are practicing this for the broadband connectivity and also mobile broadband. So if I can understand your question, so that was the main concern, that everyone should have access to internet, quality and reliable internet with a very reliable price. So we have introduced this. And I would like to respond to Deepak about the financial literacy. Definitely it is a very critical issue for each and every countries in the world, and we're really concerned about the financial literacy, because every day we are having many cases, fraud cases. So we are trying to use artificial intelligence to detect the fraud in the digital transaction. At the same time, we are capturing all the data of the transactions so that we can detect fraud, and also we can alarm and raise flags to the banking and the financial institutions. So this is how we are trying to set up this digital literacy center, and definitely we are planning to set up digital leadership academy where politicians, lawyers, doctors, business leaders, they will be able to learn about the technology, about the basic literacy in different aspects. So this is the initial thoughts and plannings from Bangladesh government. Thank you.
Yeah, but I had the other question, which I didn't.
I will
No, no,
answer that.
just,
Can
just
I?
1 minute.
Please.
Sure, man.
You want to answer?
Yeah, can I just, I'll put everything together. Firstly, I'd like to correct you. What he said about financial inclusion and learning is nothing different from traffic lights as well. We as students learned that if you jump the red light, there's a fine you pay, right? And if there's a green light, that's when you go. Same thing with financial inclusion. Financial literacy is as important, and so is digital literacy. And let me also mention to you that digital literacy, as far as digital literacy is concerned, I'm also going to be moving a private member's bill to ensure that it's included in India's syllabus and our education system on how digital societies, so we talk about civil societies, we speak about immediate communities, now we have to start talking about digital communities and digital societies, and we need to learn how to behave on those platforms. The red signal, the green, and the amber. So that's one thing. Please do not disconnect from both. Now the second question about why is data cheaper here, why is data not cheaper, etc. I think it has a lot to do with capacity building, infrastructure building. India has focused on digital, creating a digital network. We have also ensured that data is reachable to all. We also have we are a country which has a low per capita income, so we cannot keep it so exclusionary that we have very expensive data available. So that is the second part. And third question is about MPs, learning what they have to learn before teaching others. Yes, I do agree with you. That's all I can say.
Okay, so can I?
No, I think
I'm not leaving the mic. I'm not leaving the mic.
Second question?
Yeah, no. I think I'll answer this question relating to the passage of the personal data protection bill, because I think I am best placed to answer this in the panel, having been a member in that committee. I agree that the bill has now been delayed by about 2 years since the Supreme Court's, by about 4 years now since the Supreme Court's judgment, and after that be in Sri Krishna committee report. But I can tell you this much, that the EU GDPR, the European Union's GDPR, which came in 2018, was after a lot of consultation itself. And so we are not really lagging behind. Wish it was faster. No question about it that we need to have it as quickly as possible. But as anybody in this room or everybody in this room would agree, that any kind of law, any kind of regulation always lags behind the technological innovations and technological movements. So to wait for the best law may not be possible, because then the best would be the worst enemy of better. we have to follow a policy, a lawmaking which is incremental, which increases as the challenges come and bring in the amendments into the act. So if you wanted to know about the current status, since nobody is here from the government, I can't tell you that much, but I can only tell you this much, that the report has been laid in the parliament. As per law, the Joint Parliamentary Committee's drafting of the new bill will have to go as it is into the parliament. If it has to be tampered with or it has to be amended by the government, then it will be considered as a new form of a bill. So we really don't know, but I know there is a lot of confusion in the space now relating to the data quality governance framework, and people are conflating it with the personal data policy bill. I think they are nowhere related. The data quality governance infrastructure is something which is to be whole of government, across all department and all ministries. But that is for improving governance. Whereas if you're talking about personal data protection bill, then you're talking about protecting the privacy of every individual citizen, and which is a consent-based framework that we are proposing in the bill. So that answers your question. But I think on top of all this, I would say that no matter you incorporate certain things in the textbooks right at the initial level, initial stage, no matter you train people in classrooms or in rooms like this, the real adoption takes place when people actually start using it.
True.
So if a person is able to get his 500 rupees under Prime Minister's Kisan Nidhi on the appointed day at a particular time and go to the bank to draw it, that's the proof of the pudding. It lies in eating there. But that's when he gets the money. And that's when he realizes that technology has come to his rescue and technology has helped him, and then he will adopt it.
My second question, can I?
Any other questions?
Yeah, to Madam. Yeah.
To
To Priyanka ma'am.
Okay, this is the last question. Yeah. Huh?
Madam?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah. Madam, to
No, I
Priyanka
think,
ma'am.
Yeah. So I think we are ending, is it? Yeah. Okay, fine. So I think we will end this conversation. You see, technology, any discussion on technology regulations, cryptos, we can go on for hours and hours together.
But there was one
You would
question.
be, excuse me, please, don't interrupt. You would be surprised to know that while discussing the personal data protection bill, we took 2 full years, and there were some 99 sessions of the Joint Parliamentary Committee to decide on the final draft of a bill. That's how complex it is. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining.